The church cold case solved 63 years later. YouTube true crime voiceover script. 1. Opening hook. A 9-year-old girl left home on her bicycle. She told her parents she was going to return books to the local library. On the way, she stopped for a soda and some candy. Then she made one more stop. She went inside her church to pray, but Carol Ann Dougherty never came home. That night, her father went searching for her, hoping to find his little girl safe. Instead, he found something that would break his family forever. For more than 6 decades, the people of Bristol, Pennsylvania, lived with one question: who took Carol Ann's life? Police investigated. Several men were questioned. One man even confessed, but later, that confession was thrown into doubt. The real answer would not come for 63 years, and when investigators finally solved the case, the man responsible had already been dead for more than 2 decades. This is the tragic story of Carol Ann Dougherty, a cold case that waited more than half a century for the truth. 2. A normal day in 1962. It was October 22, 1962. Bristol, Pennsylvania, was the kind of town where people knew each other. Children could ride their bicycles through familiar streets. Families trusted their neighborhoods. And on that day, 9-year-old Carol Ann Dougherty was doing something ordinary. She had books to return to the local library. She got on her bicycle and left home. To her parents, there was no reason to be afraid. Carol Ann was a child doing a simple errand. She was a 5th grade student, a daughter, a sister, a little girl with an entire life ahead of her. Before going to the library, she stopped at Tommy's Cafe. There, she bought a soda and some candy. It was a tiny detail, but one that makes the story even more heartbreaking, because it reminds us that this was not just a cold case. This was a child's normal afternoon. A bicycle, library books, candy, a church, and then, silence. 3. The church visit. After leaving the cafe, Carol Ann decided to stop at St. Mark's Roman Catholic Church. She wanted to say a prayer. For a child, a church should have been one of the safest places in the world. It should have been peaceful, quiet, protected. But someone nearby was watching. Authorities would later say that a man named William Schrader saw Carol Ann enter the church. Schrader was 24 years old at the time. He lived nearby. To the people around him, he may have looked like just another man in town. But behind that ordinary appearance, investigators later discovered a terrifying pattern. They described him as a predator, a person who had a long history of hurting vulnerable people, especially young girls. According to investigators, Schrader followed Carol Ann into the church. Inside, away from the public eye, Carol Ann was attacked. Authorities believe that after the attack, Schrader killed her because he feared she would report him. There is no need to describe the details. What matters is this: a child who entered a church to pray never walked out alive. 4. The search begins. When Carol Ann did not return home, her family became worried. At first, it may have felt like she was simply late. Maybe she had stopped somewhere. Maybe she had taken longer at the library. Maybe she would come home any minute. But as time passed, worry turned into fear. Her father went out looking for her. He searched for his daughter, probably calling her name, probably retracing the route she might have taken. Then he reached St. Mark's Church. Inside the church, he discovered Carol Ann. That moment became the beginning of a lifetime of grief for the Dougherty family. Carol Ann's sister, Kate Talanka, later said she did not have many clear memories of Carol Ann herself. What she remembered was the aftermath. She remembered a police officer driving the family home. She remembered the unbearable sound her father made. She remembered nuns coming to check on her mother. Those memories stayed with her for decades. Because when a child is taken in such a violent and sudden way, the pain does not end with the funeral. It becomes part of the family's history, a silence that stays in the house, a name people are afraid to say, a question that never goes away. 5. The first investigation. After Carol Ann was found, police began searching for the person responsible. The pressure was enormous. A child had been killed inside a church. The community was shocked. Families were afraid, and investigators needed answers quickly. At first, police focused on 3 people. One was Frank Zucchero, a local handyman. Another was Wayne Roach, a local teenager. The third was Reverend Joseph Sabatish, the pastor of St. Mark's Church. These names became part of the early investigation, but suspicion is not the same as proof. Frank Zucchero eventually confessed, but later, serious questions were raised about that confession. Reports said he had been questioned intensely by multiple police officers. Authorities later determined that his confession had been made under pressure. Because of that, he was released. Wayne Roach and Reverend Sabatish were also cleared because they had verified alibis, so the case entered a painful stage. The first suspects were ruled out. The real person responsible was still unidentified, and Carol Ann's family had no justice. 6. Evidence that waited for the future. Even though the case went cold, investigators did have evidence. One important piece of evidence was recovered from Carol Ann's hand. At the time, forensic science was not advanced enough to do what investigators can do today. In 1962, police could collect evidence. They could preserve it. They could compare some physical samples. But they did not have modern DNA technology, so the evidence waited. Years passed, then decades. Investigators collected samples from many local men who might have been connected to the case. At least 175 men were considered over time. Testing was done on 141 samples. One by one, suspects were ruled out. That kind of work takes patience. It takes discipline. And in cold cases, it also takes hope. Because sometimes evidence does not speak immediately. Sometimes it waits for science to catch up. And in Carol Ann's case, that is exactly what happened. 7. Who was William Schrader? The man eventually connected to the case was William Schrader. At the time of Carol Ann's death, he was 24 years old. He lived near the area. A witness had reportedly seen him near the church around the time Carol Ann was killed. After police questioned him, Schrader left Pennsylvania. He went to Florida. Later, he moved to Texas, then to Louisiana. For many years, his connection to Carol Ann's case remained hidden. But according to authorities, his life showed a disturbing pattern. He was not just a man who made one terrible decision. Investigators said he had a history of violence and a long pattern of harming girls and women. Authorities later said he abused several young female victims he had access to, including children within his own family circle. Many of the victims were very young. His criminal history also crossed multiple states. This is one of the most chilling parts of the story, because when investigators finally looked back at Schrader's life, they saw a pattern that made Carol Ann's case fit into a much larger and darker picture. He was not a random name. He was exactly the kind of person investigators had been looking for. But for decades, they did not have enough proof. 8. Another tragedy in 1970. Years after Carol Ann's death, another tragedy happened. In 1970, Schrader set fire to the home he shared with his wife, Audrey. It happened on Halloween night. One of the couple's foster children, 12-year-old Catherine Smith, died in that fire. But Schrader was not immediately connected to the fatal fire in a way that brought quick justice. It took years before he was formally charged. In 1985, he was finally charged in connection with Catherine's death. Later, he received a 21-year prison sentence. Schrader eventually died in a Louisiana prison in 2002. He was 64 years old. At the time of his death, he had never faced trial for Carol Ann Dougherty's case. He never sat in a courtroom for what happened inside St. Mark's Church. He never had to answer Carol Ann's family. But the truth was not gone, because evidence still existed. And decades later, investigators would return to that evidence. 9. Confession revealed years later. In November 2024, investigators learned something important. Schrader had reportedly told his stepson, Robert LeBlanc, that he had killed a girl in a Pennsylvania church. According to authorities, he made the statement more than once. That information was extremely significant because it matched the core details of Carol Ann's case. A girl, a church, Pennsylvania. The timing also matched the period after Schrader had been discharged from the U.S. Army. But there was one painful question. Why did this information take so long to reach investigators? The answer is unclear. Robert LeBlanc later died, so he could not explain everything in court. And because Schrader was already dead, there could never be a trial. There would be no judge, no jury, no sentencing. But the confession did matter. It gave investigators another piece of the puzzle, and when combined with forensic evidence, it helped point clearly toward William Schrader. 10. The DNA breakthrough. The true breakthrough came through DNA. Bucks County officials were able to match Schrader to evidence recovered from Carol Ann's hand. This was the kind of evidence that earlier investigators could not fully use in 1962. But modern forensic science changed everything. After decades of testing and ruling out other people, Schrader became the only remaining match. In October 2025, officials announced that the case had finally been solved. One of the oldest cold cases in the country had reached an answer. The former Bucks County District Attorney described Schrader as a predator who had been living near Carol Ann and near the people of Bristol. For 63 years, the family had lived with uncertainty. Now, they finally knew the name of the man responsible, William Schrader, but the answer came with pain. Because he was already dead, and Carol Ann's parents were also gone, they never got to hear the announcement. They never got to see the case officially solved. 11. The pain of waiting 63 years. For Carol Ann's sister, Kay Talanka, the news brought mixed emotions. She said she never expected the case to be solved in her lifetime. For 63 years, the family carried a nightmare, and when the truth finally came, it was difficult to process. That is the complicated reality of cold case closure. People often imagine closure as a clean ending, but for families, it is not simple. The truth helps. The answer matters, but it does not erase the lost years. It does not bring the victim back. It does not undo the grief. Kay said she wished her parents could have lived long enough to know the truth. That statement is one of the saddest parts of this case, because Carol Ann's parents spent the rest of their lives without the answer they deserved. They lost their daughter, then they had to live with uncertainty, and in 1962, there were not many support systems for grieving families. Mental health was heavily stigmatized. Families often suffered quietly. They did not always talk about trauma. They did not always know how. Kay said that in her family, Carol Ann's death was rarely discussed. The silence itself became part of the pain. 12. The innocence of Carol Ann. When we talk about true crime, it is easy to focus on the investigation, the suspect, the evidence, the DNA, the confession, but at the center of this story is Carol Ann. She was only 9 years old. She was not just a victim in a case file. She was a child who left home with library books. She bought soda and candy. She went to church to pray. Those details matter because they remind us of who she was before the crime. Her life was not defined by the way it ended. She had a family who loved her. She had a name. She had a childhood. And after 63 years, investigators finally gave her story the truth it deserved. The person responsible could no longer face earthly punishment, but he could still be named. The wrong suspects could be cleared. The family could finally know, and Carol Ann's memory could be honored with the truth. 13. Why this case matters. This case matters for several reasons. First, it shows the importance of preserving evidence. In 1962, investigators could not fully use DNA the way modern investigators can, but because evidence was kept, future investigators had something to return to. Second, it shows how cold cases are never completely hopeless. Even after decades, new technology, new witnesses, or old evidence can change everything. Third, it reminds us that false confessions can happen. The early confession in this case did not lead to the truth. That is why evidence matters so much. A confession alone is not always enough. Investigators need proof. And finally, this case matters because Carol Ann's family never forgot her. Even when the world moved on, her family still carried her story. Cold cases are not just old files. They are open wounds for the families left behind. 14. A church, a bicycle, and a name remembered. The image of this case is haunting. An old church, a little girl's bicycle, library books, a family waiting at home, and a truth that would take 63 years to come out. It is difficult to understand how someone could harm a child in a place meant for prayer and peace. But that is why the case stayed with people for so long. It was not only a crime against one family, it was a crime that shook the sense of safety in an entire community. The church was supposed to be safe, The town was supposed to be safe. Childhood was supposed to be safe. But on that day in 1962, all of that was broken. Still, after decades, the truth came forward. Not quickly, not perfectly, not in a way that allowed a trial, but it came. And sometimes, in cold cases, truth itself becomes a form of justice. 15. Carol Ann is at peace now. After the case was solved, Kay Talanka said she believed Carol Ann was finally at peace with their parents. For decades, the family had lived with unanswered questions. Now at least, they knew. Kay also shared a message for other families waiting for justice. She said they should not abandon hope. They should keep holding on. Because sometimes, even after many years, answers are still possible. That message is powerful. Because for families of cold case victims, hope can be painful. Hope means waiting. Hope means disappointment. Hope means hearing nothing for years. But Carol Ann's case proves that the past is not always silent forever. Sometimes, evidence waits. Sometimes, truth survives. And sometimes, after 63 years, a little girl's name is finally spoken with the answer her family needed. 16. Ending outro. Carol Ann Dougherty was 9 years old. She left home to return library books. She stopped for soda and candy. Then she went to church to pray. She never came home. For 63 years, her family waited. And in 2025, investigators finally announced the truth. The man responsible was William Schrader. He had died years earlier, but his name is now permanently connected to the crime that took Carol Ann's life. He never faced trial for this case, but the truth still matters. Carol Ann's story is not just about tragedy. It is about memory. It is about evidence. It is about a family that waited for too long. And it is about the power of cold case investigators who refuse to let time erase a victim's name. May Carol Ann Dougherty rest in peace. And may every family still waiting for answers one day hear the truth they deserve. 17. YouTube closing line. What do you think about this case being solved after 63 years? Do you believe cold cases should always stay open, no matter how much time has passed? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more respectful true crime stories, cold cases, and real investigations, subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, justice does not arrive quickly. Sometimes, the truth waits decades to be found.